November 2nd, 1944, 26,000 feet above the ragged forests south of Mersburg, Germany. The cold is a physical presence. It seeps through the fleece lining of Captain Dean Miller's A2 jacket, through his gloves, making the metal of his control stick feel like a shard of ice. Outside his P-51D Mustang's Perspex canopy, the temperature is a lethal -50 degrees Fahrenheit. The air is thin, unforgiving, a crystalline blue void that holds no warmth. Below, a fractured carpet of white clouds conceals the enemy heartland. For 6 hours, Miller's world has been the thrum of the Packard Merlin V6050 engine, the hiss of oxygen through his mask, and the nervous chatter of his squadron, Red Flight, on the radio. They are the weary shepherds of a flock of battered B-17 flying fortresses, now limping west toward the promise of home. His Mustang, which he'd named Guinevere, feels sluggish, tired. The controls are heavy, the engine running a little rough after the long escort mission. Fuel gauges are dipping relentlessly toward the red. Every man in the 357th Fighter Group is thinking the same thing, just a little further, just get the big friends over the coastline. But the sky over the Reich is never empty for long. The Luftwaffe knows this is the most vulnerable phase of any mission, the egress, when bombers are damaged, fighters are low on fuel, and pilots are drained by hours of concentrated tension. It's when the wolves come out. A frantic voice crackles in Miller's headset, laced with static. "Bandits! Bandits at 3 o'clock high! A whole damn swarm of them!" Miller's head snaps to the right. His stomach plummets. It's not a swarm, but it's just as deadly. A dozen Focke-Wulf 190s, the feared butcher birds, are plunging out of the sun, their radial engines glinting. They fall upon the bomber formation like hawks, ignoring the escort fighters, going straight for the heavyweights. Tracers, like incandescent red claws, reach out and tear into the aluminum skin of a B-17 on the formation's edge. An engine blossoms into a greasy orange and black flower. "Red Flight, engage! Engage! Break 'em up!" The voice of Major Henderson, callsign Pops, is a gravelly command that cuts through the fear. Miller shoves his throttle forward, the Merlin engine screaming in protest as it's pushed past its limits. He bangs Guinevere hard, the G-force pressing him deep into his seat, his vision tunneling. He picks out a 190, a brute of a machine with a mottled gray camouflage as it lines up on the tail of a crippled fortress. The German pilot is patient, methodical, walking his cannon shells up the bomber's fuselage. Miller comes in from the German's blind spot, his thumb hovering over the trigger for the 6.5 caliber machine guns in his wings. He needs to get closer. The air is a chaotic maelstrom of twisting aircraft, arcing tracers, and puffs of black flag from unseen guns on the ground. He closes the distance, 400 yards at 300. The German pilot hasn't seen him. Miller's finger tightens. Just as he's about to fire, a second Focke-Wulf drops onto his own tail. The urgent, rhythmic banging sound is unmistakable, cannon shells striking his own aircraft. A violent shudder runs through Guinevere's airframe. Warning lights flash on his instrument panel. He brakes hard, pulling into a gut-wrenching climb, the German overshooting beneath him. He has shaken his pursuer, but the cost is immense. He is now alone, separated from his flight and from the bombers, drifting in a hostile sky. His radio is a cacophony of fragmented calls, men shouting coordinates and warnings, but none of it is for him. He is a ghost. He circles, catching his breath, assessing the damage. The hits were on the wing, thankfully missing the critical engine and coolant lines, but he is bleeding fuel from a ruptured tank. He watches the main dogfight recede into the distance, a furious knot of contrails against the deep blue. His mission is over. His duty is to survive, to get Guinevere home. As he bangs west, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, he scans the horizon one last time, and that's when he sees it, something that makes the cold in his cockpit feel absolute. A new formation. Lower at 20,000 feet, flying with chilling precision. 8 Focke-Wulf 190s, a full German swarm, untouched by the fight, angling in on a perfect interception course with the now exposed lead box of bombers. They're fresh, they're full of fuel and ammunition, and there is absolutely nothing between them and the B-17s. Nothing. Except him.
A cold calculus begins in Dean Miller's mind, a frantic tally of impossibilities. His fuel is critical. The needle on the gauge for his ruptured wing tank is already on empty, and the main tank is draining faster than it should. His allies, Red Flight, are miles away, locked in a life-or-death struggle of their own, and likely scattered across 100 square miles of sky. The bomber crews below are oblivious, flying straight into the jaws of a meticulously prepared trap. 8 Focke-Wulfs. The number is paralyzing. Even for a full flight of 4 Mustangs, it would be a desperate fight. For a single P-51, damaged and alone, it isn't a fight. It's a statistical certainty of death. He keys his microphone, his voice raspy from the dry oxygen. "Red Leader, this is Red 4. I have a new formation of 8 bandits. Repeat, 8 Focke-Wulf 190s. Angels 20, Vector 080. They are on a direct intercept with the lead bomber element. Over. The reply from Major Pops Henderson is strained, punctuated by the roar of his own engine and the distant rattle of machine gun fire. Copy, Red 4. We're tied up. Cannot assist. I repeat, we cannot assist. Disengage and return to base. That's an order. Miller watches the German formation. They fly with an arrogant perfection. 2 groups of 4 in a tight, disciplined wedge. They are the A8 model, the Stormbach. You can tell by the heavy underwing cannon gondolas. These aren't rookies. They are seasoned veterans, bomber killers from an elite Jagdgeschwader. They are everything a fighter pilot is taught to fear, disciplined, well-armed, and possessing a numerical advantage that borders on the absurd. Pops, they're going to massacre them, Miller transmits, his plea cutting through the static. The response comes back, harder this time, devoid of sympathy. It's the voice of a commander forced to triage his losses. Miller, I am not losing a pilot and a plane for nothing. Your fuel is critical. You are alone. You are committing suicide. Turn back. Acknowledge. Turn back. The words echo in the cramped cockpit. It's the sane order, the logical order. Survival is the primary objective. A dead pilot can't fight tomorrow. He knows the doctrine. He knows the odds. But his eyes remain fixed on the 8 deadly specks, closing the distance to the lumbering, helpless bombers. He sees the faces of the bomber crews he'd shared coffee with that morning at RAF Leiston, boys of 19 and 20, their faces still round with youth, entrusted with a 10-ton machine and a prayer. Turning back feels less like survival and more like a betrayal. And then an idea surfaces, a radical, desperate theory he'd argued about with the other pilots back in the briefing room, a concept met with derision and laughter. They called it the Knight's Charge, a relic of a forgotten age of chivalry, a tactic so insane it just might work. He'd argued that in a head-on pass, the P-51's primary weapon wasn't its 6 machine guns, it was its speed, its mass, its terrifying kinetic energy. He'd theorized that if a pilot could master his own fear, he could use his entire aircraft as a psychological battering ram, aiming not to shoot, but to force the enemy leader into an impossible choice, break formation, or face a mutual, high-speed annihilation. They laughed him out of the room. A fancy way to die, Knight, they cheered, using the mocking nickname they'd given him. Acknowledge, Red 4. Pop's voice barks in his ear, demanding a reply. Miller looks at the 800s, then at the flock of sheep. He takes a deep breath, the cold oxygen burning his lungs. The laughter in the briefing room fades, replaced of his strained, resolute calm. He isn't aiming for 8 planes. He's aiming for one single point in space, the dead center of their formation. He keys the mic one last time, his voice steady. Red 4. Negative. He cuts the transmission before Henderson can respond. There is no turning back now. With a deliberate, steady hand, Captain Dean Miller pushes the throttle lever past the gate, ramming it into the emergency war power setting. The Merlin engine responds with a guttural, earth-shattering roar, a surge of raw power that vibrates through every rivet of Guinevere's frame. He bangs the Mustang, not away, but toward the enemy. He takes the long, elegant nose of the P-51 down into a shallow dive, trading altitude for speed. The 8 Focke-Wulfs grow from specks into distinct shapes. He is no longer an escort. He is a missile, and he is aiming himself straight at the heart of the wolf pack.
The world outside the canopy dissolves into a blur of speed. The needle on the airspeed indicator climbs with terrifying swiftness. 350 miles per hour, 380, now pushing past 400. The P-51, an aircraft designed for graceful, sweeping combat, transforms into an instrument of brute force. The airframe begins to shudder under the strain, a high-frequency vibration that travels up the control column into Miller's hands. The Merlin engine is no longer just a sound. It is a physical concussion, a deafening, all-consuming scream of a machine being pushed to its absolute breaking point. This is the essence of the Knight's Charge, not a dogfight, but a terrifying exercise in physics and nerve. You are not fighting 8 airplanes. You are fighting one formation. This was the core of Miller's theory. A Luftwaffe swarm was a perfectly drilled unit, its strength derived from its discipline and mutual support. But that discipline, he gambled, was also its greatest weakness. It was a rigid structure, and he intended to become the hammer that shattered it. In a traditional head-on pass, a pilot would open fire from 1,000 yards out, then break away at the last second.
This was a dance of deflection shooting and evasion. Miller's plan was different. He would not fire early. He would not break away. He would fly as if he intended to pass straight through the space occupied by the lead German pilot. This was a direct challenge to every law of self-preservation. The Focke-Wulf 190 was a fearsome opponent in a head-on attack. Its powerful BMW 801 radio engine was a massive shield of metal protecting the pilot. Its armament was devastating, typically 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns, a wall of explosive firepower that could shred a Mustang in seconds. The P-51, by contrast, had a glass jaw. Its revolutionary liquid-cooled Merlin engine, the source of its incredible performance, depended on a vulnerable radiator and coolant system housed in the scoop below its fuselage. A single well-placed cannon shell into that scoop, and the engine would seize in minutes, turning the world's greatest fighter into a 4-ton glider. Statistically, in a head-on clash of firepower, the FW-190 held every advantage. But Miller wasn't playing a game of statistics. He was playing a game of psychology. From the German perspective, what they saw would have been baffling. A lone Mustang, miles from its squadron, not fleeing, not attempting to outmaneuver them, but diving directly at their center. At first, they would assume it was a rookie, a panicked pilot making a fatal mistake. The German formation leader, a veteran Oberleutnant, would be calmly instructing his pilots to hold their course, to hold their fire until the American was in optimal range. They would prepare to converge their cannons on this single, foolish target and obliterate him from the sky. The closing speed is incomprehensible, nearly 800 miles per hour. The distance between them is vaporizing, 3,000 yards, 2,000 yards. Miller's world narrows to the gun sight and the growing shape of the lead FW-190. He can see the yellow spinner on its propeller, the black cross on its fuselage. He forces his breathing to remain steady, fighting the primal instinct screaming at him to pull up, to break away, to live. His thumb rests on the trigger, but he does not press it. Firing now would signal his intention to fight. His intention is something far more terrifying: collision. Inside the German cockpits, confidence would now be curdling into confusion, and then into raw animal fear. The Mustang isn't slowing, it isn't chinking, it isn't firing. It is simply growing larger in their windshields at an impossible rate, a silver spear aimed at their hearts. The Oberleutnant is likely screaming orders into his radio, but at this velocity, tactics are meaningless. There is no time for maneuvers, there is only time for reaction. He and the pilot in the center of the formation are now locked in a personal duel with Miller. They have less than 3 seconds to decide if this American is bluffing, 3 seconds to decide if he is truly insane enough to commit to a mutual suicide pact at 20,000 feet. The entire integrity of their 8-plane formation now rests on the nerve of 2 men who are staring at their own mortality screaming toward them at the speed of sound. Miller holds the stick steady, a human component in a guided missile of his own creation. The charge is about to strike.
1 second. At a closing speed of over 1,100 feet per second, the world shrinks to the space between 2 canopies. For Captain Dean Miller, time itself seems to warp, stretching and compressing in the same heart-stopping instant. The lead Focke-Wulf is no longer an aircraft, it's a wall of rivets, glass, and spinning propeller blades filling his entire field of vision. He can see the pilot, a fleeting silhouette, a man he is about to meet in a shared, violent oblivion. The instinct to live, to wrench the control stick back and survive, is a physical force, an overwhelming wave of nausea and terror. He fights it down with everything he has, his knuckles white, his jaw locked so tight his teeth ache. He holds his course. He is the immovable object. From the Luftwaffe Oberleutnant's perspective, the unthinkable has happened. The American is not breaking off. This is not a feint. This is not a conventional attack. This is an execution. His entire combat doctrine, his years of experience, his ironclad discipline, all of it evaporates in the face of this suicidal, incomprehensible charge. He has mere fractions of a second to react. His brain can barely process the image of the Mustang's propeller, a shimmering, transparent disk of death about to chew through his own cockpit. The choice is no longer tactical, it is primal. Live or die. He breaks. With a violent, reflexive shove of the stick, the German leader throws his FW-190 into a desperate, rolling dive. His wingman, seeing his leader suddenly vanish from his sights and the P-51 now filling his own windscreen, reacts with equal panic. He banks hard to the left, his own survival overriding any thought of formation integrity. The effect is instantaneous and catastrophic.
The two center aircraft of the German swarm, the keystone of their formation, have just ripped a hole in their own center. This is the moment Miller had gambled his life on. The chain reaction is immediate. The two pilots flying directly behind the leaders, suddenly faced with the spectacle of their wingmen violently breaking apart and a silver demon flashing between them, are forced to take their own evasive action to avoid a mid-air collision with their own comrades. The perfect, disciplined wedge disintegrates into a chaotic scramble of individual aircraft. The invincible 8-plane Wolfpack has, in the space of a single second, become 8 terrified, scattered pilots. Miller finally presses the trigger. As he blasts through the hole he has created, he fires a long, continuous burst from his 650 calibers, not aiming at any specific target, but spraying a wall of lead into the confusion. It's a purely instinctual act, a final, defiant roar. He sees his tracers stitch across the wing of one FW-190 as it dives away. He feels, more than hears, the percussive thumps of stray cannon shells from a panicked German finding his mark, peppering Guinevere's belly and wings. Then he is through. The world erupts from a tunnel of focus into a hurricane of slipstream and turbulence. Guinevere is tossed violently, the air churned by the passage of 8 Focke-Wulfs. For a terrifying moment, Miller is fighting for control, the stick bucking in his hands. He pulls back, the G-forces driving him into his seat as he bottoms out of his dive, the sky and clouds swapping places in a dizzying arc. He levels out, his heart hammering against his ribs so hard he can feel it through his flight jacket. He is alive. He glances back. The sight is surreal. The German formation is gone. In its place are 8 individual aircraft scattered across miles of sky, some climbing, some diving, none of them pointing towards the bombers. They are in complete disarray, their cohesion shattered, their attack broken before it ever truly began. He has not shot down a single one of them for certain, but he has defeated them all. The night's charge worked. It actually worked. A wave of adrenaline-fueled euphoria washes over him, followed immediately by the chilling realization of his own condition. The Merlin engine is sputtering, coughing black smoke. A spiderweb of cracks has appeared on his canopy, and the fuel gauge, the one that still worked, is now resting firmly, unequivocally, on empty.
The roar of the Merlin engine dies with a final, shuddering cough. In its place is an unnerving, almost peaceful silence, broken only by the whistling of the wind over Guinevere's wings. 15,000 feet over enemy territory, Dean Miller is now the pilot of a very heavy, very damaged glider. The silence is profound. For hours, his world had been dominated by the engine's deafening power. Now, its absence is a terrifying countdown. Every foot of altitude he loses is a foot he can never get back. His only hope is the long, shallow glide west, a desperate attempt to stretch his momentum into miles, to coast over the front lines before being forced to bail out or crash land. He works his controls with a delicate touch, nursing the wounded Mustang, keeping the nose pitched perfectly for the best glide ratio. The smoke from the engine has stopped, but the smell of hot oil and burnt glycol fills the cockpit. He tries the radio, his hand shaking slightly. Mayday, mayday, Red 4 is down, engine out, gliding west from approximate grid square. He doesn't finish. The radio is dead. The cannon shells that had peppered his fuselage had severed the power. He is now completely, utterly alone, mute in a silent sky. Below, the landscape is a patchwork of snow-dusted fields and dark, forbidding forests. Every village could hold an enemy garrison, every field a trap. He scans the horizon, not for enemy fighters, but for a landmark, for a sign that he is nearing friendly territory. The bombers he had saved are long gone, invisible specks racing for the safety of the English Channel. He wonders if they even saw what happened, if they understood the sacrifice of the lone fighter that had appeared and vanished like a phantom. Did Pops think he was dead? The thought brings a surprising pang of regret. He had disobeyed a direct order, an act that could see him court-martialed, if he even survived to face one. Minutes stretch into an eternity. 10,000 feet, 8,000 feet. The ground rushes up with alarming speed. He picks out a long, flat field that looks promising, but as he gets closer, he sees the rows of wooden. He prepares to bail out, unbuckling his harness, ready to jettison the canopy. Just as his hand reaches for the lever, he sees it. A glint of sunlight off metal. A forward airstrip, hastily built. A simple dirt runway bulldozed out of the French countryside. It's a forward operating base, just inside Allied lines. He might just make it. He coasts Guinevere into a wide, sweeping turn, lining up with the crude runway. With no engine, he has only one chance at this. He lowers his landing gear manually, cranking the emergency handle until he hears the satisfying clunk of the wheels locking into place. The ground surges up to meet him. He flares, pulling the nose up, bleeding off the last of his speed. The wheels touch down with a jolt, kicking up dirt and stones.
The plane bounces once, twice, then settles, rolling down the runway before finally coming to a stop just feet from the edge. Silence. He sits there for a full minute, the wind whistling through the cracks in his canopy. He is breathing hard, his body trembling with the delayed shock of adrenaline. He made it. He is alive. The canopy slides back and the sounds of the world rush in. Ground crew are running toward him, their faces a mixture of alarm and astonishment. He wouldn't hear the full story until days later, how the scattered remnants of Red Flight, after fighting off their own attackers, heard his final defiant transmission. How Major Henderson had logged him as missing in action, presumed lost, his voice heavy with the commander's grief. And how weeks later, the story began to trickle through intelligence debriefings, a report from a rescued B-117 crew about a single, unidentifiable Mustang charging headlong into an entire German swarm, shattering their attack run and saving the formation. They spoke of it with a sense of awe, as if they'd witnessed a miracle. When Miller finally returned to Leiston, the reception was not what he expected. There was no court-martial. There was only a stunned, respectful silence. The men who had laughed at his knight's charge theory now looked at him with a mixture of disbelief and reverence. Pops Henderson pulled him aside, not with anger, but with a firm hand on his shoulder. He said nothing for a long moment, then simply handed him a glass of whiskey. The mocking nickname was never used with irony again. From that day forward, he was simply Knight, a pilot who, when faced with impossible odds, chose not to fight a battle, but to win a war of nerve, armed with nothing but a wild theory and the courage to see it through. He had jousted with giants and emerged, against all logic, the victor.